Alright, welcome back everyone. This is Mike Trippy, aka Johnny Rush. You can visit my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/xx Johnny Rush XX. That's where I do a little gaming when I'm gaming there, but this educational series has been strictly on YouTube. Anyway, I kept fiddling around with the player controller issue I had yesterday. And I wound up getting it working yesterday using a different method than I had anticipated using. If you recall, I was trying to use information from a video I watched earlier or previous couple days. I actually reviewed it several times. It was about moving a sphere around a plane, and it was picking up some rotating cubes in that video. Anyways, because the sphere was actually round, you know, the person that was doing the video was showing how to use the add force method of the rigid body component that would be placed on your player controller, and using a script, he would use the add force method in that script, and that worked great because it was a sphere. There was no I guess let's step back one. Let me just add this. This is based off the physics engine. When using add force, it's using the Unity physics engine. So with physics, you're going to have things like mass, gravity, weight, friction. You're also going to have just some external forces that'll be resistance forces. Let's put it that way. And so, for example, I had a cube, and so essentially what was happening, because I fiddled around and wound up discovering that it was actually trying to roll my cube, and so since it couldn't get enough force applied because of the physics engine to roll it, with a sphere in the video, the guy was using a sphere for that very reason, because it starts rolling right away. That's why you had a gradual roll. It started rolling, and then it kind of picked up faster because the force was being added, and it was like pushing a ball. It's easier. If you have a box, with mass, which by default the primitives have a mass of 1, whatever that equates to, but apparently the standard force that was being added was not enough to overcome the mass of that object, because it would have to slide, and when it slides, it creates friction, which is additional resistance force that was canceling out the add force that was being applied. So if that makes sense. So anyways, I fiddled around. I did a sample project. Actually, this is I have it loaded right here. It's called testbed. It's going to let me I'm going to use this to just play around with stuff. And so initially I created 2 different player controllers, which I don't have active right now. Let me put the first one in, player 1. And I guess we can move that up 1. And so let's look at the script on that. That's going to be we looked here, if you look down here, it's player controller. That's the script. It's attached to that object. So as soon as we click play and run this, the scripts automatically get loaded, and anything that's in the start function will immediately occur, and then anything that's in the update or fixed update functions, the way it works in Unity is for every frame of your game, it runs the code within that function, the fixed update or just the update. And so I'm going to jump out to Visual Studio here and show you the original player controller. So that was the one that goes with player controller. That's the way I got it working initially last night, because I got fed up with the add force not working and couldn't figure it out. And so basically the way that works, if we go back real quick, when you're using transform.translate, you're moving it by altering the transform directly, and it doesn't require a rigid body because it's not a physics movement. You're just moving or relocating the object. So if we look at the player, we look down here in the inspector, you'll see the various components that are here: transform, a cube mesh filter, box collider, mesh renderer, player controller of the script. You don't see a rigid body there, but yet if we play it, yeah, you'll see we can move that left and right. It actually moves pretty responsive to the keyboard. You see that as I'm clicking right, it's stopping and turning the other direction, and it seems to be a very evenly applied, movement, which is almost the way we're going to need it for this Space Invaders game. So you see that moving there. So anyways, that's that one. So now let's close that, and let me show you. Okay, now we'll uncheck that so that player's not showing there. It's not active. And let's do player 2, activate that one. And I just used the enemy texture just to differentiate between the two. But you see on this one, this is what I was originally trying to do. I added a rigid body component. You can see it right here. Based on what I was doing. And originally, I had constraints expanded here. You see freeze position, freeze rotation. Some of these are checked, and I'll explain why in a minute. But let's go to the code for this, because in order to use add force, you have to put a rigid body. The rigid body works with the physics engine and is attached to that game object. And so when you apply the force on a rigid body, it'll then move it along. Well, like I said, the mass here, if you look on a rigid body, the first property here is called mass, and it's set to 1. And apparently, we go to player controller 2. That's the one I have tied to that game object. And so this is what was originally in the code before. From the example, that's what they used for the sphere when I was watching that video. Like I said, with the sphere, it started rolling right away because there wasn't that resistance from, a box with a cube. It's trying to roll. There's going to be some resistance as it's trying to roll that. So why I just didn't push it. But anyway, as I started playing around with this, I started increasing the speed. And let me show you what happens here. And that's how I discovered what was kind of happening. Let's uncheck all this first of all, because these by default are not checked. And you'll see in our player controller here, we got a speed variable. I have it set at 50. But 10 was what was in the video that I was watching. And so when I had 10, using all the defaults, everything that this person had, let's hit play. Of course, it's got physics in there, so it dropped. You see, gravity took over and dropped it because it has a box collider now. It's interacting with the physics engine, which means gravity is enabled at that point, and so the box dropped. I had it raised up off the platform. That's the first thing. Now, if I push left, which I'm doing right now, you see that? It starts rolling like that. It's not actually what we want. You know what I mean? It's like rolling like crazy. Now, initially, it wouldn't even do this, and the only thing I can think of is that I forgot to set the speed value. Maybe I left it at 0, so it wasn't enough. There was no speed. Like if we set this to 0, it probably wouldn't have done anything. So that's what was happening. It just wasn't moving. It wasn't doing anything. Well, and the other thing I also did playing around, there was something about is kinematic, which I read on, and what that does is it has to do really with when you're getting into collisions, and that's what he was doing in this video. And so I used a feature that I really didn't need, but by doing that, it essentially it will act on collisions, but the physics forces will not affect this particular game object itself. But anything that it does to other objects, game objects in your game, they will be affected by whatever. Like it can apply physics forces, but it doesn't receive them. Is the way I understand the kinematics. So it turns off receiving physics forces. So when I had that option on, of course we'll play it again. You'll see it essentially acts like it's not doing anything. See, it didn't. The gravity's off now. and then when I push left, it's not doing nothing. Right, so it wasn't being affected by forces at that point. But here's the thing about it. Let's take this out of full screen. This is kind of how I discovered the code was actually working. Because when we run this, if you watch this transform here, this area, position x1, x0, y1, 0, 1. Well, right now it's 0. I mean, it's not moving. But let me change this back. When the kinematic was off, and again, I think I had, let me set the speed to 1, something low. What I saw was that the numbers were changing. As I moved the arrow keys, I saw the transform. See, I see the values moving right now. You see that? They're moving. I guess I had it at 0 initially, and I didn't set the speed, or the speed wasn't right, or the mass was something about it. And my box may have, my actual player controller, the size of it was bigger, so the mass, even though a 1 is an index of mass, because the volume of that was larger, its overall mass became greater. And so the 10 by default was not enough to push it. But you can see it's applying forces here, but it's not moving the object. What it is, it's not enough force. So these are things to keep in mind when you're using a rigid body with, and it automatically starts interacting with the physics engine. You've got to keep those kind of things in mind. They really do have a true realistic physics engine here. So like 10, we put it back to 10, we said 10 seemed to be enough to get it to move. As you see how it tips over? Look in the bottom here. This is the scene view. This is the actual game mode. If I would have went full screen, you see it. But it takes a while before, well, I'm like, let me tell you, like, okay, right now I'm pressing right. You see it takes it a while. So it is applying the forces, but once it gets going, it's like bouncing all over. Now, in this one, I let it go, you know, the Z and the X axis, so I can go kind of use the A, W, S, D keys and really move this thing around in all directions, but not upward, you know, like in the Y axis. So anyways, but that, again, once I got the forces to work, I started playing around. I was like, wait a minute. This is not going to work for the player controller because it can't be, we're using a cube shape by default, and I don't want it to be bouncing, you know, around like that. I also, in our Space Invaders game, but I also don't want, I wanted it to hover above, right where I had set it, in that position above the platform, our base platform, and the ground basically. And so I started reading up, and I found these constraints here, and that's what I was looking at. And you can freeze either the position, X, Y, and Z. So what that means is you won't affect any of the positional values on the X, Y, or Z axis, or 3D space, I should say, and the rotation on these axes, the X, Y, or Z, you can freeze that rotation. So, for example, right now the gravity's turned on because we've got rigid body. It's going to drop to the ground. But if I were to freeze Y, which is the up and down in our game, you'll see when I hit play, it should keep it right where it's at, and it won't drop because if the physics are still being applied. I'm sorry, my bad. I clicked Y. I clicked the wrong Y for position. That's the rotation, so it don't spin like funny. All right, so let's let that go, and you'll see. See, we locked it in the Y and we're good. Now it's moving, but it's hovering, almost like the land speeder in the original Star Wars. So we can go in all different directions, up, down, left, right. So the forces are being applied. But you see the forces are kind of, you know, like they add up. As you hold, it gets an increasing force. The force increases as you hold it, or it decreases. So now we're like way out of bounds. So let's reset that. So now if you had something that was on the ground, and you wouldn't necessarily have to worry about locking that, but see now if I take the Y off, of course it's going to allow it to drop to the ground. And then when I start moving left and right, because it's got friction and it's touching the ground, it will start to try to roll it or tumble that box. And one way you can stop that from happening is you lock any of the rotation. And I did it on, like I said, all three, which I initially, and then I added the Y because I didn't want it to drop down. But I'm finding out now as I went through this, really I could have just checked the Y because it doesn't rotate. Once it's in the air, not touching any objects, it won't rotate. Now, if it ran into an object that caused it to tilt, or because of the physics, then it would shift. So if you want to lock the rotation so an object does not rotate, regardless of what it comes in contact with, you would lock whichever axis you want. X being your, more or less, when you're looking at the third-person view or this view in 3D, X is going to be left to right. So if you it won't rotate on that axis, which the rotation effect on the x-axis, even though the x-axis runs left to right, the rotation is sort of away from you and toward it, like, you know, in the what I consider the Z, really. It's really rotating in the Z depth that way on the x-axis. So you got to keep the rotation. Just think of the spindle and something rotating on it. So anyways, we want to lock all that down. And now if we hit play, I just want to show you. If we lock that down, it'll still drop because I didn't lock the Y position. So we allowed the gravity to pull it down. But now when I move the arrow keys, see, nothing's happening at all. Because that 10 force, once it starts hitting the ground, is not enough. I found I could have did, I think 20 will do it. It's a little bit slow, but just adding a little more speed, or speed value, which actually is applying more force, is enough to get this thing to move. So that was another issue. It was a combination of issues going on. And so you see it's not rolling. I can go back and forth. It's locked it so it doesn't rotate, which means, you know, it's not going to tumble and do all that funny rolling it did as a cube. But this is still kind of not, you'd have to do this to get the feel for it. But as like I'm going right, and when I switch left, it still has some forward momentum going to the right before it slows down, stops, starts coming left. So the physics engine is really at work here. And anyway, I mean, this would be almost great for navigating like a car or something on some kind of path. I mean, just the way the physics work. But for our use, what we want to do in this game, I found out the rigid body is not going to work for what I was trying to do. It was just an example I saw. I thought I could apply it to the game, but after testing and experimenting with it, showing you the two different ways to move this cube, you can see it's clearly not the effect we want. We don't want that slow kind of ramping up to a speed. We want some really responsive movement left to right with our players. So we're going to stick with what we did with the original player. No rigid body. We have a player controller. If we look at that script, that's using the transform dot, setting a transform position, and then it's updating that every frame. It's updating that, so based on the input from the horizontal axis, which is your A and D, you get a positive or negative number there, and then your and that's it, horizontal. We're not really wanting to move vertical. That's why in this formula we kind of took that out. Now I'm going to copy this. Because I don't know. And the other thing is this is done when using the transform. Because transform does not use or interact with the physics engine. It's literally just moving that game object in 3D space. There's no forces being applied or anything like that. Gravity's not. All you do is relocating it in a different position. You call that in the update function, not the fixed update. The fixed update is for anything that's interacting with the physics engine. So just keep that in mind, and that's something that I need to keep in mind as well. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and close that solution. It'll close that, and we're going to load our project. Let's see, open project. We'll get out of the test bed. We're going to go back to our project 1, Space Invaders. So that'll take a little bit to load, but essentially I'm going to go in there and just make sure we're set up with no rigid body. I think I've already done it. I did it last night. It was working. I just want to make sure everything looks the way it needs to and is working. So the next phase of this is to write a similar script. Now that I'm moving the player controller, we need to write a similar script that's more, it's more sequential on that one. It's not going to be dynamic through user input. But for the enemies, they have to move as a group left to right. So I'm going to have to write that script where they move to the left. I'm going to collide with the wall. Something's got to be triggered to switch the direction and move it down. And they move as a group. So really, as soon as, and the beauty of that is when this script is going to be attached to every single enemy, only the outer enemies really are going to be the ones that will hit that wall initially. So as soon as one of them hits, it'll automatically trigger the direction of travel to go the other way. So I guess my concern, though, and I guess we'll have to cross that bridge when we get there, is if there's, we've got like five or six rows of these enemies, and so if all 5 hit the wall at the same time, is it like if the first one, if it's processing each enemy in order, so let's say from the top down, and the first one hits the wall and switches direction, because we're going to have to use some kind of variable that's going to indicate a positive or a direction, plus or minus, which would indicate either left or right, but we're going to have to switch direction. So we do that, but now if it processes the second object, is it then going to toggle that direction back to the wall? You know what I mean? And so maybe it gets kind of stuck where it's kind of jerking back and forth the whole group against the wall. I don't know how that's going to work yet, or maybe that when that direction changes and it updates the next enemy, it's already updating away from the wall. You know what I mean? And so maybe it won't re-trigger that. And we're going to have to experiment with that. I'll have to look at that when we encounter that. Well, the main thing is to get the script written and get it moving, and we'll see what happens. So that's going to be it for this stream right now. I'm going to take a little break, get my thoughts together on this next script, and I'll return to code that out and get that rolling. So, I do want to check before I leave here. Let's check our player script again. So yeah, we do have the rigid body in there, and I think I wound up locking everything in, including the Z. And let's run this and see what it's doing, because I turned off gravity and kinematics. See, I was doing whatever I could to get it to work, but I don't know if it's going to be responsive enough like I want it to be. Maybe it will be. We'll see. Yeah, it's actually not bad. Actually, I'm moving the arrow keys. See it? See how it hits the wall. It stops, like it won't go any further. I do want that effect. I don't know if it's moving fast enough, though. Again, we'll have to see. And it actually seems kind of big. It's like the enemies could easily kill us. But again, it's just, we can worry about that later, resizing it. I don't know. I might leave it like that, because this may be a better way, because of the fact when we get to I think I mentioned this last night, and I may be repeating stuff, but when the enemies start dropping missiles and the missiles coming down, the missile itself is going to be a game object as well, and it will have to have a rigid body to interact with the physics because it's going to collide and hit. I guess it don't necessarily need to interact with the physics. It just needs to be able to trigger a collision, which is different than having physics effects applied to it. So, and it's the same with this player. So we might be able to switch it out. We don't necessarily need, like we're not having, I guess we're not really having physics forces that are going to be applied to this paddle, other than the fact that I used it to move the paddle. But yeah, it's probably not the right thing to use for this. It would be different if, like, we had something that was dropping and had needed to bounce off something and, you know, deflect to another area and show some realistic roll or you know. But this is just moving back and forth. All we're doing is moving back and forth, and I believe we can add a trigger collider on her, which will trigger a collision with another game object, which has nothing to do with the physics engine. The physics engine is a separate, really, component altogether. It works exactly what it is. It applies physics elements to the game to make it more realistic and come up with realistic simulations based off the physics. But so I'm going to change and modify this. Let's do that right now. And so yeah, so even the speed I had to bump up to 75 the way it was set. It was just crazy. So let's do this. Let's go to the script. Let's look at our script and see where we're at. We're going to have to open that script. See player script right here. Oh, we're still running. That's why it wouldn't let us do that. Alright, so we've got the player script here. Okay, that's the spawn player script, and then player controller. Yeah, it's right there. So let's open that. And I did update. Actually, was launching the 2015. I did find where I needed to go to switch Unity to use the new 2017 Visual Studio Community Edition that I downloaded. So using the newest one on that, I can show you where to go for that. It was actually a pretty easy setting to find. I just didn't look for it before. It really didn't matter. I mean, we're not doing really heavy-duty scripting. But I did notice that the 2017 seemed to support these. I recognize a lot of the built-in functions in their IntelliSense better than the 2015 did. So for Unity. Anyways, under Unity, if you want to change your default editor, you go to Edit, and then you go to Preferences, External Tools, and where it says External Script Editor, you drop down and you choose the one you have. Now, I have several installed, so if yours does not show up, if you're using something other than these, it's not showing up, you can go to Browse and actually pick it, and it should add it to this list. But Mono Develop is the one that's built in. So in that first tutorial where I was saying what tools you need, the Visual Studio 2017 was my preference, using the Visual Studio, because I was familiar with using it and doing some C# programming. So that's why I chose it. But you don't have to. You can use Mono Develop. And one thing that's great about using, I guess, the built-in one, the Mono Develop, is in some of the videos you'll watch, if you watch anything on the Unity website, any of the videos they have for tutorials, they make a mention to using, like on a Windows platform, Control and the single quote, or on a Mac, Command and single quote, to get some context-sensitive help for a certain keyword. For example, if you want to learn about the input, you know, object or that's in there. You could highlight that and then do the the command or control and the single quote. It would automatically jump to the online documentation for Unity. Since I'm using Visual Studio 2017, it doesn't that's not available for me. And I tried to hit F1, which is their normal thing. You just hit F1 for help when you have something highlighted. But it went to the Visual Studio documentation. It didn't recognize that as a Microsoft keyword in their C# language. So because it's an external thing for Unity, but it's still anyways. So I have to go and bring it up manually. So I just keep a tab open with the documentation, and I have to type in the search box what I need and have it look for it that way. So there's an advantage to using the built-in editor, but again, it's very basic. So if you want something a little bit more robust and things that you can do as far as debugging and all that, Visual Studio is great for that. So that's what I'm going to continue to use. Just keep that in mind if you're not using it and your screens look different when you're trying to do this. It's because I'm using a different editor possibly than what you're using. All right, so let's close that. There's no save button when you change that. You just select it and then click the little X to close that. All right, so I need to redo this entire script, and I'm thinking, let's get back here to Visual Studio. So we have our public float speed. I think that's all we really needed. Let me go look at under documents, project files. Let's see, Unity projects. What I'm going to do is just copy and paste this code I had in there just to assets, scripts, and I started to organize that. Player controller, the first one, let's open with, we're just going to open it with Notepad to pull in what we need. So collections, generic engine, and so starting with public in speed, that's pretty much all we needed. Copy. So what I'm going to do though is I like to don't necessarily want to delete this control because we may go back to it for reference. We'll kind of keep that. But what we can do is go into Unity, and I'm going to organize all this. Let me just go ahead and do that right now. We're going to start by adding create a folder called scripts. And so we have our materials. Let's kind of just drop it in there. Okay, another folder, create folder. I notice we got a couple of prefabs. So let's do that. Create. And we're going to organize this stuff right off the bat. Enemy prefab. Our player prefab. And we have a shield prefab. And a sidewall prefab. Alright, and then our materials, let's go ahead and just drop that in the materials folder. Yellow. Okay, enemy. Okay, and then our scripts. We've got a player controller script, our spawn cube script. And this doesn't affect the game. It won't, as long as you're doing it here in the Unity and the project folder here. Or project tab, and you won't break anything doing it this way. It'll just help organize it, and it does all the internal referencing or changes it needs to do to make sure all this still works, because we are essentially moving that asset, whether it be a script or text or whatever, to a different folder within our structure on the file system of Windows. So it'll take care of fixing that all up to make sure it works. Wall texture. Materials. We need to add one more, create a folder, scenes, and this is what they recommend. If you watch some of the videos, they have every time you create a new type of asset, you save your stuff in folders. So it makes it organized. So if we want to just see, for example, we click scripts. Now we'll just see all our scripts. We're not having to search through a bunch of stuff. And so now with that selected, I'm just going to go create C# script. We're going to call this player controller 2. It's going to be a different name than the other one, but similar to it. And we're going to open that. That should launch it in Visual Studio 2017. So we'll just do that, delete that, Control V, paste in what I had before. Okay, so that's good to go. Let's save that. Oops. Okay, so we have our new player controller added. So the only thing we need to do now, if we go to our prefabs, go to player. Right now it's got the player controller, but we're going to switch that to the player controller 2. We can click this little dot on the side here, and hopefully it will. Or maybe not. I'm sorry. That's not how we do that. Scroll down. First of all, we're going to remove player controller. So remove component. So we got that script component gone. We're also going to remove the rigid body. We're not going to need that anymore. Remove component. And we're going to add a component. Scripts. If you're doing a new script, you click down here, but existing scripts, we should be able to click here. And I guess I got some default ones. I never noticed that. I never looked here. But anyways, player controller 2 is what we're selecting. And we're going to set our speed to, let's start with 10. Let's just see how that works with this. Hit play, let that run. Alright, so that's pretty good. But it looks like it's kind of, I don't know if it's sunk in or not. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like our thing is kind of, whoa. Let's rotate that too. It's out of alignment too. It's not even where it should be. Alright, so we need to reset that. Yeah, that's even out of position, so it's out of whack. Let's see, why is that? It's got a Z. If let's set that to 0. Y is 1.5. We're going to bump that speed up. I want it twice that to 20. Let's hit play. Let's see what we got here. Still put it way back there. Why is it all the way back there? That's my question. Let's go look at the. That's why it's important to, when you first add something, to reset it to 0. So you're at the center of the origin of your 3D scene, 3D world, and then adjust from there. Everything's an offset from origin. I didn't do that when I did this when I started it, so it kind of messed things up on me. Anyways, let's stop that. Let's look at our scripts. We have a spawn player script. Just instantiate the player, so wherever the position is, it's going to throw it out there. So Okay, so let's go back to Unity and prefab player. Let's just drop the player in there so we can see. Okay, so that is that position there. So we do need the -8. Okay, we did need the -8. And it looks like it's where it should be. It's raised up. Okay, so let's leave that in there. I think I took that out of there by accident. Okay, so under player, now we're going to apply. You notice the player prefab still has Z at 0. Our player that I copied, I grabbed the prefab, dropped it in, created an instance of that prefab. I modified the value, which adjusted it where it needed to be, but it didn't update that. If you want a setting from an instance of a prefab to save back to the prefab, to the, what you want to call your master template or blueprint of this game object, you need to click the apply, which will take these settings and apply them back to the prefab. Now, if you have multiple players in here, you could directly modify the player prefab, and it would automatically, from that, when you update the prefab, it automatically updates the instances. It doesn't do that automatically from the instance back to the prefab. So keep that in mind. I need to apply that. Now, if we check the player prefab, yeah, see it's showing the -8 now. So now we can delete this. So let's run our scene again. See if it shows up. But see, it's kind of pushing it way out there. That's just kind of messed up. I was trying to figure out why is it throwing it back here. It's like that. It's being reset. Let's look back at our player. It's -8. It's got to be something in the script that's doing it. Oh, and the reality of this too is that player didn't necessarily have to be a prefab. I didn't need to do that because it's really just messing this up. But I could have just had the player as a game object in here. There's only one of them. When you're dealing with an item that you're going to use, a game object that you're going to use more than once, then that's when you want to create a prefab. So it can be a blueprint sort of, and you could reuse it in the game world somewhere else on the fly, either by dragging it in or back in code, you could instantiate a game object, which is kind of what we're doing. You see there's no player here, and that's what we do with this this script that just popped up. This is basically how you spawn a player. Create a in a script using a script. So now the script, if we look back, first of all, you create a public transform player. That's going to be your variable that's going to hold a transform for a game object. And then in the start function, all you do is use the instantiate keyword and the word player, and that's it. So now, by making this public, we look back at Unity, and we look at, actually have it tied to the plane game object, which is our floor, our ground. You see the spawn player here. It has this player variable here. If we jump back again to our Visual Studio here, you see that's what I called it, player. And so that exact variable, public variable, becomes exposed or shown in Unity here in the script component. Once you drop it in there, it's the script name, spawn player, and then you get this player, and you got this box there where you generally would drop in whatever your transform game object will be. In this case, we want the transform. We want to pass in the transform component of a player object, so we can take that transform and spawn in a player. And all you do is drag take a prefab and you drop it in there. In which case, that's what I do with the player. I dropped it in there, and it will automatically find the transform component of that player prefab game object and use it within that script. So that's how you have to do it. Sometimes I've done it before. Went back. I remember working on this stuff. I'd write the script and do that public variable, and I'd drop the script in and add it to as a component to a game object, and then I would forget to drag down from my assets one of the prefab game objects I've created and drop it in there, and so that I can use it to create an instance out in my 3D world. Anyways, I'd run it and it would never get spawned, and it's like, well, what's going on? And it's little things like that you might forget. Just once you start doing it over and over, you get used to it. All right, so still trying to figure out why it's resetting the positioning of that. My guess is because, see, if we look at the plane, we did -8. -8 put it right here. But see, our plane, for some reason, I don't know why, but I have a -10 on my plane, which I don't know why that was even set that way, to be honest with you. It should be all zeros. Maybe that got changed by accident with me playing around. Alright, so let's check that out. Let's see what we have here. Let's see if that lines everything up. It's closer. It's definitely closer. See what's happening is, I guess, yeah. Anyway, what I'm going to do to correct all this is we're going to set this back to a -10. We already have that the way it was. We're going to expand this out a little more. We're going to scale it up, I think, to a 3. That's 3. Make that a little, or we may even go to 5. 5. Just see more of the red carpet in our scene, so we don't see kind of the outside. I want that blue skybox to be shown. It's called a skybox. What's kind of the defaulted thing around your 3D environment here. There's other ones we can add. There is a skybox component we can add and get some really nice cloudy looking nice skybox scene up there, but we won't worry about that for now. And what I'm going to do is take the player, just drop it in there, because when we do that, it's dropped in exactly where it needs to be. It's this prefab is actually messing it up, so I'm going to delete the prefab. Just take that out of the game altogether. Go back to our plane, and we no longer need the spawn player thing. It even says missing transform. I deleted that. We're going to remove that component, and now do that. We'll have it exactly the way we want it. We should. It's moving it back again. Why is it doing that? It's just trying to mess with me now. Why is it actually moving it? It's like it resets it. To a Z of 0. go look at our script and make sure that script is not doing anything. This is what I mean, and try to fix one thing and break another. So we can. So it is setting actually the position to 1.1.1, which could be what's moving it here. I think that's what it is. That's right. There was an example I used that was setting it so it was like at the XY instead of origin 000, XYZ 00, it was resetting it. That's probably what's causing it. Let's give this a whirl. Alright, and so now let's do this -8 thing here and see what happens. Yeah, it brings it back into play. So let's stop that. Let's reset that back to -8, which is what it was to begin with. It puts it where it needs to be. Let's save our scene. Save scene. Play. And there it stayed where it was supposed to. Okay, so now we have, it's now really responsive. You can tell it's really moving with the keys. But it's kind of moving too fast, but it's, now we took the box collider out of there, you see it's going right through the wall here. And that speed was definitely way too fast. Set that to 10. Let's play around with that. I guess we'll play around with the number to get it right. So we're going to have to figure out we've got this box collider component. Let's see if it's on here. But it's not checked as a trigger, like where it'll trigger a collision. So I honestly don't know why they even put it on there then. Without it triggering stuff. Need to figure, probably watch some stuff. How to trigger that event. Basically, the way I'm thinking we're going to have to fix this is once we enable this trigger checkbox here, it allows us to write a script that can use like the on collision triggers collision, so that we can start using non-collision events, and when it collides with the wall, it we can use that in a script to not apply a transform movement based on the arrow keys being pressed. So it'll essentially stop at that point. The forces or the whatever positioning that we're applying in the positive or negative direction using the keys, the A and D key to move left and right, will halt, and so it should stop it and keep it within bounds. And so that's what I'm envisioning. We're gonna have to do this without having a rigid body here which interacts with physics, which would automatically have it hit and stop at the wall, you know. But like I said, the way the physics work, the forces being applied on it, it didn't move the paddle in a very responsive way, which is what we need here. So it's something to consider, and it's something I've kind of learned, I guess. We don't necessarily need that, you know. So anyway, I think it'll be an easy fix. But we're going to end it at this. I'm going to watch, like you said, I'm going to watch a continuation of the rollerball. Let me just show you real quick. So if you want to see what I'm going to be looking at offline, and then I'll come back on later when I get ready to make some changes here. Yeah, it's this one here. It's player. This is the one I've been watching. Player controller. I paused it. Well, actually, it finished. Okay, there's the moving the camera, introduction, setting up the player, moving the camera, collecting, scoring, and building the game. Okay, so that's probably the series here. And collecting the pickup objects. I believe that was the one that showed what I need, which is how to use the trigger collider and on collisions and, events and all that. So um, this here was creating the collectible objects and it was colliding. So I'll watch probably maybe 1 and 2. And then there's displaying the score and text. This is a great one for an intro into a basic UI, which will show a score readout. We'll use that in this game as, you know, we score points. We're going to want to show it, you know, on the UI, kind of like an overlay, and that's what the UI system does. It creates like an overlay over this 3D rendered scene, and it's great for creating HUDs and score readouts and things like that that you would typically see in most games. So let's cut the stream off. I know I'm rambling on and going on a bunch of stuff, but that's what I'm going to be doing is watching these videos, get my head on straight on what we need to do, and I'll come back with another live session on making those changes and showing the progress of that as we do it. So, till then, y'all take care. Hope to see you back.